Okay, let's see what the Prog Archives has in store for me today. What new bands can I take a look at? Dream Theater. Well, that sounds like a really cool band. Let's see what they sound like. Is that a vagina? Oh boy, here we go. Dream Theater, The Astonishing. The 13th full-length studio album by the Progressive Metal Gods. If you are current within the progressive metal or progressive rock scene, you at least know the name of Dream Theater. These guys have been around since the early 90s and just made a huge name for themselves with their second and third album of Images and Words and Awake. Since then, it's kind of been hit and miss depending on who you ask, but in terms of my own personal opinion, they have had a solid career. That was until their 2013 self-titled release. So it was approaching this album that I was a little hesitant. It was the first album of theirs I honestly wasn't looking forward to. The more I heard about it, the more I kind of got on edge, or at least was cautious about it. I was hearing that it was a double album. And on top of that, it's a concept album in the truest sense of the word, in that it follows a narrative story, much like Tommy or The Wall, and less so than some of their previous concept albums, such as Octavarium, Train of Thought, or 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence. This was a full-on story, much like Metropolis Part 2, Scenes of a Memory. And so, after the first listen to it, I was honestly disappointed. And this was just the first listen. It was the biggest shift in musical approach the band has ever undertaken. It was much less in your face the entire time. It was much more subdued and subtle even at moments. It was a much more quiet approach. It wasn't just riff after riff after riff of a lot of their previous outcomes. Petrucci, the main guitarist here, has actually taken a step back in the musical landscape and has let Jordan Rudess. Originally he's been more of the keyboardist, but really his main center stage has been on the grand piano. And so he has taken now the front stage on most of these songs. It was really the first time the band has tried something really different and almost original in terms of their own presentation of music. This was the biggest downfall of the last release from them, where they really didn't try anything new. They stuck way too close to their musical formula, and this was the first time they've actually deviated from that. And it is long. It is very long, clocking well over 2 hours. So for the casual listener, this is just going to be way too much music to digest in one sitting. It is laid out with a bunch of these interludes going on to kind of give the listener a break. So the album is presented very much like a musical theater production, and it's for that reason that I say a lot of musical theater enthusiasts are going to love this album, but a lot of metalheads are not going to like this album at all. And because it's so long, there's something on this album for everybody not to like. But let's actually dive into the music. Let's actually talk about what's on here. The first act is definitely much softer than the second act, which is definitely much heavier and meaty in the riffs. As I said, the overall presentation of this album is much softer in what we're used to with Dream Theater. Now because of this, there's still a lot of the staples of the Dream Theater type of music that we've come to expect, and there's a lot of really great meaty riffs from Petrucci. This is especially seen on the second act with The Path That Divides. And after The Path That Divides, we have a little bit of that mechanical interlude, which then brings us into the next song of The Walking Shadows. And this is another very meaty one, and it deals with kind of the fallout of one of the battles and some of the consequences of that battle. These two moments show that the band still has some of those darker moments and some of those really meaty hooks in the guitar work. And what's really great is the band has crafted some really memorable moments and some really catchy tunes. The two that really stand out for me is Acts of Faith, when she's talking about my music player. My music player, my private paradise. The other one is definitely A New Beginning, and this is one of my favorite songs off of the album. It really captures everything that I love about the band, and it actually shows both all the good things about this album as well as some of the bad things, and we'll get to that in a second. But this particular song has one of the most catchiest moments, and one that I keep playing over and over in my head. Father, is it true? But was always you. Finally I can feel how music makes me feel. Now you understand why I was fighting this every day. So, some of the really good things that I like about this album. The new approach to music is a huge plus, where I feel that some of these songs, if done on their own and just in isolation, would definitely fall flat. And this is part of the reason why I didn't like their 2013 release. And the playing by Jordan Rudess is some of the best he's ever done. I've noticed in the past, and his playing style is very much just a noodling around on the keyboards. He's really trying to use the entire scope of the keyboards, and this time I felt like he was much more in his zone, much more focused, and much more to the point. And of course, I really love the storyline. It's definitely been done before, and the archetypes are more than predictable, and sometimes we'll get into that a little bit later. But really, the standout star of this entire album is James LeBray's vocals. He has outdone himself. In the past, much like Jordan Rudess has, I felt like he was overstretching himself. I felt like he was trying to recapture a lot of those really high notes he was able to do in Images and Words and Awake. But this time, I think he's finally found where his limits are, and he's definitely playing within it. And he is doing a standout job, especially depicting a lot of those characters that we have on this album. Even though it's a little difficult at times to distinguish which one is saying what, and which one's a narrative, and which one is actually a character, I felt like he did a great job at really putting that emotion that's needed in these characters. But as I'm sure you've heard from many other reviewers and critics, this album isn't quite perfect, and there are a few things that I didn't quite connect with, and certain things that I feel need to be talked about. Obviously, there's a lot of very weak and very flat symbols and similes and metaphors on this album, but really that's been prominent in Dream Theater's writing for quite a while, and I feel like they didn't quite dig deep enough for like those really juicy metaphors that they could do. And there's one quote where it's, "This battle won't be over until it's won," and I've recently also been listening to Megadeth's album of Dystopia, and there's a line that says, "The quickest way to end a war is to lose." So I felt like these two kind of go hand in hand, and I almost kind of like the dystopian metaphor a little bit more than the Dream Theater one, but again, it's mainly just keeping it within the context of the story. And also some of the sound effects that were used on this album were kind of cheesy. I mean, they use marching a lot, depicting, movement, and we're carrying the story forward. There's a couple stabbing scenes, and you hear like this breath, and at times it kind of takes you out of the music a little bit because it's a little bit over the top. And there's one point near the end of the album where there's two individuals that are crying over a death scene. That really took me out. I'm like, are they laughing? Are they crying? What's going on here? So that was a little bit weak in my mind. The songs can get a little cheesy at times, like especially with Hymn of a Thousand Voices. It almost sounds like a Christmas song when I was listening to this. I'm like, this sounds a lot like something I would hear off of a Trans-Siberian Orchestra album when they're doing their Christmas albums. And also some of the names of these are pretty bad, like Nefarious. That's pretty one-sided, man. And Gabriel as the chosen one. He's the possessor of the music that we need. Like Gabriel as in like, I mean, that's where my mind went. But some of the bigger concerns and some of the big drawbacks to this album. The one, much like all of Dream Theater's albums, I can't hear the bass by John Ming, and I know John is a great bass player. he has to stand beside John Petrucci. So I know he's got the stuff, and I hear him every once in a while, but he's not a dominant figure. And I think this is just with the mixing of the album, which is a shame because I know he's doing a lot. Also, I love the concept of those machine ball orb music makers, but I'm kind of disappointed that they didn't incorporate them into more songs or even give them a full-length song as opposed to just those musical interludes. I love the musical interludes and I really like some of the sounds that they created, but maybe incorporate them more into the songs themselves or give them a full-length song just to show the power that they have. Really, the two biggest complaints about this album, first up is the drumming, and I hate to do this because there's no way you can come into the shoes of Mike Portnoy, one of the founding members of this band, but now we are in 3 albums. Michael Mangini, he's a great studio drummer and he's a great timekeeper, as many of my drumming friends will say, but as a drummer, it just leaves a lot to be wanted. I'm listening to a lot of these songs and I'm like, okay, he's keeping the beat, he's keeping up with everybody, that's great, but where's that finesse? Where's that adding a little bit of flair here and there? Most of the time, he's just keeping beat. And again, I know it's really hard to fill the shoes of Mike Portnoy, but I don't know, there's something that's missing within his style. He's fast, that's for sure, and that is a great talent to have, especially for this band. But when writing his own pieces, it just feels flat. And let's get back to the one piece when I said A New Beginning is a perfect showcaser of what's great about this album as well as what's bad. When we get into the main guitar solo of this song that ends the song, it's just a regular rock beat that is keeping up with Petrucci's riffing on the guitar. Because in the past, when we've had guitar solos like that, we've had drumming that's just all over the place, that's really complementing Petrucci's playing. And so in this, it falls a little short, and it's a little bit disappointing to just hear a basic 4/4 beat instead of something a little bit more tasty. And really, the biggest drawback and the biggest critique that I have about this album is really the ending. It feels like it ends 2 or 3 times instead of just really ending, and what it's lacking is really the biggest critique that I have. Like all of Dream Theater's big, epic pieces, we had a giant blow off the doors, no hold bars, either guitar or keyboard solo that just really brought everything home, and this was really missing on the Astonishing. It just kind of ends on that, yay, we're done, we got to the end, huzzah for us, but there's really no blow the doors down giant finesse that I really look forward to with all Dream Theater's big epics. It's a real letdown after 2 and a bit hours to not really have that really beautifully packaged bow to wrap everything up, and I was a little disappointed that that didn't happen. But that's all the critiques that I have. Overall, and in the end, this album has been one of the most fun I've had with music for a very long time. I had a ball with every single listen that I had with this. Each listen gave me more discovery. I have to say, pick this guy up in a physical copy. I recommend CD, even though they're kind of passé at this time, but you need a booklet at least just to follow along with the lyrics, because that really enriches the enjoyment, knowing and following along the story. And that's about it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I know this was a little bit of a beast and it's a little bit late, but I really wanted to get the music under my belt first before I started talking about it. So thank you guys for waiting a little bit for this review and also for following along and getting to this point. So what did you guys think about it? There's a lot to talk about on this album, so let me know of your own comments down below. Did you like it? Did you hate it? This album is definitely splitting people. Even though I've seen mainly praise, there is that select group that is definitely not liking it, and their opinion is very valid. There's a lot not to like about this album. So let me know what you guys thought down below. And that's about it. Alright, notes out. Music makes me feel, now you